Cycling power meters have been around for ages, over 20 years in fact, and most serious cyclists will use a power meter to track their efforts in training and racing. But more recently, in the last 5 years or so, the ability to track running power has emerged through new devices and technology. But is cycling power and running power the same? And how useful is running power?
Now, most triathletes are familiar with their power numbers for cycling. A power meter has become a relatively accessible device for cycling and perhaps one of the best training tools for cycling in itself. And they work by using strain gauges usually located in the pedals, the cranks, or maybe even the bottom bracket, and basically work by measuring the amount of force that you as a rider are applying to the bike. And that number, expressed in watts, directly translates to how fast you ride.
It's an objective measure of how hard a cyclist is working, regardless of speed, heat, wind, road surface. So it's very useful for prescribing training. And that's what it's used for in cycling. Now, running power meters attempt to do the same. Provide an objective number that runners can use to measure their effort and prescribe their training.
Yeah, now previously for running, we used to use heart rate. So the higher the heart rate, the harder we're working, the more effort we're putting out. But heart rate does have its limitations. It can be affected by heat, hydration, and even fatigue. And also, let's not forget the effect of lag with heart rate. Basically, the amount of delay that you get between your effort you're putting in and the heart rate response.
But running power meters can't actually measure the amount of force a runner is applying to the ground. And even if they could, it wouldn't be as much use as a cycling power meter, because a lot of a runner's energy is used in lateral and vertical and rotational movements rather than forward motion. So running power meters actually use a range of sensors, including accelerometers, gyroscopes, and speed sensors, combined with other metrics like incline, pace, ground contact time, air resistance, all processed in a tiny, powerful computer using Newtonian physics to estimate a power number that the runner is using in almost real time. So can you, or should you, compare your bike and run power numbers?
Well, as you can probably already work out if you followed our previous explanation, bike power and run power, whilst they both use the same name, power, and unit, watts, they are measuring different things and are measured in completely different ways. So to answer your question, they are completely unrelated.
Yeah, and that's for two reasons. Firstly, they're measured differently, as we said. When I say measured differently, what I mean is cycling power meters actually measure your power, whereas run power meters estimate it based on a whole bunch of data. But even if they were both measured, when you compare two cycling power meters, the variation in two cycling power meters is so big that they're almost incomparable. So if you were comparing bike and a run power meter, it would be a useless comparison. And on top of that, you can't actually calibrate two bike and run power meters to read the same anyway.
Yeah, and the second is that there is little, if any, correlation between bike power and run power. For instance, you could increase your bike FTP by over 50%, and that would not transfer in any way whatsoever over to your running power, and vice versa. Okay, your aerobic fitness may be transferable to a degree, but your other areas of fitness will not transfer, so you can't change and relate your run power zones to your bike power zones, for instance.
It is probably worth noting at this point that some of the numbers you're so used to using in cycling are all but meaningless for running power. Your normalized power will seldom vary from your actual power because there's no freewheeling or coasting when you're running. Your intensity factor will correlate almost exactly with your percentage FTP in running power, so is all but meaningless. And your variability index will seldom vary away from 1.00.
Yeah, but of course, none of this really matters if you're simply a runner, because you'll be comparing yourself to your own runs, or you're a cyclist trying to improve your FTP. In fact, the only people that would worry or consider comparing the two units are you guys, triathletes. And we're telling you now, stop it. Just stop it. Try to think of them as two completely different units, almost like US dollars and Namibian dollars. They both use the name dollars in there, but they are very different things.
But this is GTN, and we don't like to just talk about these things. We like to test them. So we're going to go out on the bike and run using power meters and see what we can compare. We would call it GTN Does Science, but we just told you they're incomparable, so it's not very scientific. But it might still be interesting.
Yeah, so we're going to do a 10-minute bike and a 10-minute run and try to hold the same effort level for both of them. We're going to take slightly different tacks here though. So I'm going to hold 300 watts on the bike and 300 watts on the run. And James is going to hold the same heart rate. What are you going to go for?
I'm thinking 150, but that might be a bit hard. Maybe 140.
Oh, God. Anyway, therefore, trying to hold the same effort level between each.
Yeah, so then we'll record our power numbers and our heart rate numbers and see what we can compare and what conclusions we can draw, if anything. Probably nothing. Oh well, let's give it a go.
Hey.
Okay, so we've both done our bike test, 10 minutes on the bike, Mark at
300 watts.
Yeah, and myself at 140 beats per minute. Actually, I struggled to even hold 140 beats per minute. That's pretty hard going. It was significantly higher than his 300 watts. Yeah, so there's already a flaw in our plan. But now, time to do 10 minutes on the run. I've got the Nerve power meter. Mark's got the Stride power meter. There are other options out there too. So yeah, we're not going to run through all the various options, but more and more companies now making pretty good running power meters.
Yeah. Well, we best get on with this.
We best do, yeah.
All right,
let's go.
Well, already he's dropping me. There we go. He's trying to stick to his heart rate and I'm sticking to 300 watts. Well, other than some terrible stitch, 300 watts running is considerably easier than 300 watts cycling, I'll tell you that.
Hey.
Whoa! All right, well that concludes our very slapdash experiment. We've got a lot of data, so bear with us here.
So, on the bike, I did 10 minutes at nearly 140 heart rate. I couldn't quite hold it there the whole time, and my average power was 315. On the run, I did the same heart rate because that was the goal, and my power was nearly 350, so significantly higher power, which goes to show almost nothing. On you, on the other side, on the other hand.
So I held 300 watts on both. On the bike, I had an average heart rate of 135. On the run, I had an average heart rate of 140 at 410 per kilometre pace. Now that sounds like I went harder on the run.
Yeah, it does.
But actually, it was significantly easier. Now,
effort-wise.
Yeah, now this is where it gets confusing, so bear with me. When I run, obviously we're supporting ourselves, using a lot more muscles, and generally my heart rate is higher when I run. That's fact for a lot of people out there. My zones are higher relatively to the bike. So, whilst the heart rate is higher, it's actually an easier effort when you look at my zones.
You're using so many more muscles. So, basically what we've come to the conclusion is Mark, his power that is estimated on his run is very similar to the heart rate that he was holding. Where my heart rate, I have to use a lot more power on the run. But like we said at the beginning of this video, your run power zones are absolutely no way correlated to your bike power zones, which I guess is what we've shown here. However, we will say right now that there is a lot of information that these run power meters give you, and they're fairly consistent. Like when we went up a hill, it was like, wow, my power's spiking here.
Exactly.
And when you go down a hill, it's like, whoa, I really got to work here to keep that power the same. So the algorithm and using all the data that they're using is actually quite accurate and interesting when you're running.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same. And I guess if you remember back to the start of the video, we said, if you're a runner, use run power and compare it to your runs. If you're a cyclist, use the bike power and compare it to your bikes. I have been using Run Power for a while, and I've been doing exactly that. So if you're going to use them separate and don't combine the two.
I've quite enjoyed using this power meter for the first time on my run. I think I might have to do a few more experiments and a few more runs with it. Yeah, a lot of interesting data comes out of it.
Yeah, well, we hope you guys have enjoyed today's video. If so, please do give it a thumbs up, give it a like. Get involved in the comment section down below if you've been using Run Power, or obviously Bike Power. I'm sure there's a lot more people out there who've been using Bike Power. And if you aren't already doing so, please do subscribe just down below.